The Fearless Leader Podcast.
All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Fearless Leader podcast. Today, I have a special guest, Dr. Gerald Fitzhugh II, Superintendent of Schools of Orange. How are you doing, Doc?
I'm doing great, Mr. Belton. Doing really great today.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Listen, I know you're a busy man. I know I done probably had to beat out a few other folks to get you here. So I want to say we appreciate you. Appreciate having you here. Definitely.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm also glad that we'll be able to have some dialogue about educational practices, but also the socio-emotional effects of the pandemic and what we're doing as a district to ensure that students and staff are getting what they need to move the instructional, but also the socio-emotional envelope forward.
Got you, Doc. So let's jump right into it then. Well, before we go too far, Doc, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
All right. So first and foremost, I'm a husband and a father first. So a lot of folks look at superintendents and just think that it's a job, right? But the job is not just a job. It's about the work that goes into being the superintendent. I have a great wife who's a first grade teacher in the city of Newark. We have been together for 16 years, and I have two great kids, Alyssa, who is 10, and Evan Gerald, who is 8. And everything that I do every single day is predicated on my relationships with my wife and my children. And so we talk about who is the superintendent. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a brother, I'm a son. At the age of 23, my mother passed away from liver cancer. She was a hard worker. She worked up until 2 weeks before she succumbed to liver cancer. I got my work ethic from that particular entity, from my mother, who said that you have to keep pushing in the face of adversity. My dad, my ace, my brother. I became a Mason. I became a Conda Noble and a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated because of my dad. My dad is my hero. He is my best friend. And when I tell you that his work ethic is like no other, he worked for 70 years at the 50 years at the North Public Library. He retired at the tender age of 72. And so when you talk about work ethic and wanting to get back to your craft, I look at both my parents who had a sound work ethic, but also they were just great folks. And if I could take any way away from them, is that being a great person emulates into the work that you do on a continuum.
Wow, that was a lot, Doc. That was deep. I appreciate that honesty. You know, we speak to so many so many guests, and I hear like the backdrop of work.
Mhm.
And that was good that to hear that the family piece about especially when men are asked who you really are,
Mhm.
and give a little bit about your backdrop.
Absolutely.
Orange is on the move. So you want to talk a little bit? I want to jump into that, Doc. I want you to talk about some of the things that you're doing, Doc. So, folks might drive through the town. They might see a little bit of you on Facebook or whatever, but they might not really know. So I want you to jump into that for a minute. Just talk to me about, some of the things you have happening in Orange.
Right. So I always like to begin with there's no I in team. So from you to Dr. Stewart to Miss Alcantara to Mr. Gaines to Mr. Um, Pettit to Mr. Iannucci, I can name all the principals, Dr. Blanton,
Mhm.
Mr. Machuca, all of the principals are part of the work that we're doing to move the district from good to great. But also we have some really great directors that are also part of the work, from Dr. Russo to Dr. Powell, Miss Harris, Mrs. Harper. We have our Executive Director of Human Resources, Mrs. Jones Dismuke. We have our wonderful Business Administrator, Mr. Adekunle James. There's no I in team, right? So every person that I name outside of that, they are working with the leadership to ensure that we have a sound vision and mission. Now, we all know we talk about the administration, but we also have to think about those support staff members, the teachers who are bringing forth the mission and vision every single day. I say this, and I've shared this with the principals at our meetings. No one knows how to lead like the principals in Orange know how to lead, or the directors know how to lead in a pandemic. There is no book for that kind of work. So when I talk about, what we've been doing as a district, I would just want to preface it by saying we're in a new normal stage and everybody's learning a new craft. We didn't learn it getting our master degrees, right? And I know I didn't learn it, going to get my doctorate to Seton
Right,
Hall.
right,
But I
right.
know I learned little by little about experiences from surveys from families, I learned a lot from the administrators and the teachers and the support staff, even our trauma support team. I have four great folks that are part of that trajectory, from Ms. Dana Jones to Ms. Laguna to Mr. Wallace and also Ms. Thomas. All those folks have made me stop and think about the whole importance of self-care. And so I want to start with that because I think that is one of the most important pieces before we
Mhm.
even talk about the academics, right?
Right, right, right.
Because the academics are going to come, but we have to make sure that folks are good as it relates to the health and their mindsets. So every Wednesday, I'm sorry, not every Wednesday, but the third Wednesday of the month, we have a self-care Wednesday where we are engaged in yoga, or we're engaged in even cooking, baking cookies, right, on YouTube. And doing exercises, walking around Bell Stadium. We're doing those things because we have to make sure that our minds are in readiness to make substantial change for the academics for our students. So when I'm going into Self-Care Wednesday virtual spaces, or if I'm going to a location that is in person, I have the opportunity to see folks coming together as a team, right? And so
Okay.
I'm learning more about the staff in terms of some of their struggles or some of their successes, but also I get to learn about them as parents or husbands and wives or partners. Because again, we often think about the work as making sure the objectives on the board, making sure that we
Correct.
have $18.2 million in scholarship. I can say that in a minute. But I do think that we kind of forget who is in front of us. And I think in order to develop a group of folks that, and one thing I think that is good with in the last few months that I've been there, a year and a few months, is that we've really taken ownership over ensuring that folks have happiness in their lives outside of the workplace, and that they can vent in a safe place, and that it's not going to be punitive, because nothing that I feel that folks say to me is punitive. I think that it helps me reflect on my practice as a leader. So some of the great things, um, 80% in curriculum and programs on NJQSAC, which is one of the greatest accomplishments in our district. So the work began with the former administration by getting those scores and continuing trying to move those scores. We did not have the opportunity to have NJSLA last school year, but I did have the opportunity, right,
Mhm.
with the teachers and the directors to revise curriculum. We had a perfect score in the curriculum area as it relates to standards, essential questions, enduring learning understandings. And when I tell you we had teachers who were dedicated to the revision phases, we had directors who were also dedicated to that. And every director brought down their, I like stuff in paper. So I like to have post-it notes. So these are the schedules. I'm virtual today. So these are the schedules for phase 3 and 4. I
Right,
have
right,
all the post-it notes ready to email and call the principals after the podcast, right?
right.
So the post-it notes that I gave to the directors and the teachers were my notes about what could be improved on the curriculum end. And what was good for me was that I was able to read every single word of every curricular document that is on the website. And so when I had questions, I could call Dr. Powell, or I could call Miss Harris, or I could call Dr. Russo and say, what was the thinking behind this particular essential question?
Mhm.
And I was able to assist with the development of the creation of essential questions that I learned when I was assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction in the city of Hoboken under the leadership of Christine Johnson. She taught me, and I felt like I could pay it forward by teaching other folks what the paradigm should look like as relates to strong curriculum writing. So I'll never forget who teaches me those particular stages in the curriculum writing game. And so I just want to thank Dr. Christine Johnson for that particular entity, because without her, I would have never learned how to do that particular nuance.
Doc, let me
So
ask you real quick. Are
mhm,
you
yep.
always that inclusive when there's situations on the table? You're always that inclusive to pull your team in and have that sort of dialogue?
I think it's important to have stakeholders in that particular at the seat at the table. So I was talking with a partner in the work where I'm writing an article about the CRAM model, and that's about mentoring. And we're going to utilize the CRAM model here in Orange Township to retain staff for them to stay here and for them to grow and develop, right? And so I feel that part of it, the CRAM model allows folks to have a seat at the table. So when we were creating the return to school plan, there wasn't a thought in of my mind of not calling both of our unions, the teacher and support staff, paraprofessional unions, as well as the administrative union. I needed to know from their perspective what the needs and concerns were from their shops, right? Having surveys for parents, that's critical. So we do the same thing, bringing them to the table. Now, if you recall, district goal number 2 speaks about community engagement. So what are we doing? Three great things. Tonight, December 17th, we're going to have a parent forum, part of our Parent University series, which is led by Reverend Jefferson and Mr. Barry Devon. So I'm really excited about that particular entity that's coming into Orange Township. The next pieces from the district goal number 2 are the parent and as well as the student council meetings. They meet once per month. And through the Office of Community Engagement and myself, we have some really great folks on the line where we're talking about the school district, what we're doing really well, things that we can improve, right? And what's really great about that particular experience is that parents have the opportunity to quiz me, right?
Okay.
And they're able to ask those questions about what's been in their mind about the pandemic and instruction, or things about that are really going well in the school district and how they can become partners in the work. And I'm really excited about the fact that we have parents that are part of the infrastructure that want to be part of it, and they're looking forward to all the meetings that we are so forth having.
Okay. Okay. Well, Doc, walk me through or just explain to me the formula for academic success. What does that formula look like?
All right. So that's my happy place. The academics of the district is my happy place. Right. So I think
I'm gonna take you to your happy place, Doc.
it was my happy place. You know, it's better than doing other things like writing emails or things of that nature. But when I'm in a classroom, wow. So yesterday was a snowstorm, December 17th,
Right.
right? And on the 17th of December, called one of our principals, Dr. Lofton Cook, and I said, I just want to see some classes.
Hmm.
And when you walk into a classroom and teachers are engaging in a virtual space with the sharing of the screens, which also having their virtual word walls, which we discussed at our administrative meeting, right?
Yes.
So it shows me that there was a correlation between the teachings at our administrative meetings and then the implementation at the school level. So going into the classrooms at Forestry Community School alongside Dr. Lofton Cook, I was able to see the practices that we had discussed last week at our administrative meeting. If it's not just a virtual word wall, it goes back into question discussion and utilizing the Bloom's taxonomy questioning cues as indicators for academic success.
Okay.
So a lot of what we've been doing in the district has been looking at sound practice and looking at some things that can be tweaked a little bit and being honest within ourselves to say, it's not working, but if we do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, then we can improve the practice. One of the most important pieces is looking at trend analysis. So I know often we talk about it, but what really is it, right? And so, like I shared with the Board of Education, more particularly the curriculum committee, are strategic walkthroughs that are happening in the district. I know you had yours last week,
Yes,
Mr. Belton, and I know that many other folks had their walkthroughs as well. And we look at those areas in the lesson that are strategic and may not be as strong throughout the course of the lesson, right? And so as we're looking at those particular nuances in the 5 or 6 classes we're looking at, that creates the trend.
Okay.
And so we know that through the trends, that creates strong professional development practices at our building levels. Now, we talk about the one size fits all model, and I shared with you all the book that I had read before becoming superintendent was the Define Standardization by Christopher Tinkin. And Christopher Tinkin, as we know, was my mentor for my dissertation study. And when I talk about that particular study, I think about the importance of not having the one set standard for all of our students or one set standard of professional development for our teachers, which means that a subset of teachers need this particular
Mhm.
nuance, whether it be assistance with um, creation of assessments or development of essential questions. It could be two different nuances for those particular teachers, but we have to make sure, right, that we give them what they need and not what we think they need, which
Right.
is why the trend analysis is so important. And I believe that's why the district is really moving from good to great, because we are all learning how to identify, based on the trend analysis, what the pitfalls are and what we have to do as leaders to remediate it.
Doc, you jumped on or you touched on the idea that you put out from moving the district from good to great. Um, Go into that and explain to me, like, why is that the center of your vision?
So I believe, and I wrote some notes down about good to great. Um, but I just want to share that we were in a good place, right? And so in every good place, we want to move up to the next trajectory, which is great, right? And so we're already on our way there. The Jim Collins book talks about factories and how those factories were built into great entities in the business field.
Right.
And so a school district is not particularly a business field, but we still deal with a budget, which is business like,
Hmm.
right? And we are going to have a product,
Right.
which are our
Correct.
students to be successful.
Correct.
But we also want our staff to be successful. We
Hmm.
want to pay it forward, right? And
Right.
so the way we pay it forward is through the development of our staff. And also, if we develop them well, going back to defining standardization, where we talk about the nuance where it relates to not having that one size fits all, but having a differentiated model for our staff. That's how you're going to be able to move folks, right? And so folks will be more apt to buy in if the development is not standardized, but in fact it is differentiated for their own particular needs, right? Because we don't want to make folks bored when they come to professional development,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
We want to make sure they're going to be ignited and excited
Hmm.
about the work they're going to be doing through a professional development opportunity.
Hmm. Doc, go into the difficulties of being a superintendent now. Like, we talk about budgeting and the
Mhm.
hiring folks and trying not to let folks go and trying to still have quality education. Uh, what's the balance? What does that look like?
So it's a lot of hours, a lot of great hours, right? A lot of reflection, right?
Right.
And so I think that every position in which I've held has prepared me for this particular step. And not forgetting that first you begin as a teacher, right? And then you move your way up the ranks. Well, in my particular scenario, right? And so I felt that having the opportunity to stand as a teacher and a vice principal and a principal and assistant superintendent, I understood what every single person in our organization is going through. Not to say that anybody who didn't go through those particular ranks don't understand. I just understand in a different fashion. As I share with the board every month, I've coined myself the teaching superintendent. I want to always remember my time in the classroom, right? When I
Hmm.
taught in grades 1, 4, and 5 at Dr. William H. Horton Elementary School in the city of Newark, right? And when I see my students doing things successfully, when they become teachers, when they become a fire person or a police officer, I can go back and say to myself,
Hmm.
well, was one of those lessons that we taught about community, that yield one of my students become a police officer, right? Because we want to make sure that we have some type of impact. So the title superintendent is great, but I think that it is all encompassing. I think that it encompasses being a teacher, a parent, a counselor, a principal, a vice principal, a supervisor, so a paraprofessional. All of those jobs are encapsulated into being the superintendent. Because without all of you, I cannot do the work that I do on a continuum.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, Doc. So I see the vaccines, I see the trucks on the news, and I see that the vaccines are being shipped around the country.
Right.
Doc, give us your thoughts on as we come out of COVID, like what would be what would be your biggest concerns about education coming out of COVID?
So there's a few things. We all know that there's vaccines that are on trials, right?
Hmm.
And so there's always conversation about side effects. And so I always wonder, would those side effects be problematic as it relates to acquisition of knowledge? Do we also know, what effects it would have on, the social emotional side of students and staff? So I want to know more about that as relates to next steps. But coming out of COVID-19, I always worry about the academic acumen of what we've been doing. So we have to reacclimate students, right, to the school buildings. We have to reacclimate our staff to coming in every day and, not being in that virtual space. But we did have some lessons learned. We learned a lot about being able to do professional development across buildings on a Zoom or a Google Meet,
Correct.
because I don't think anybody thought that through before, right? Or some may have, but it's now a mandate that we're able to do professional development across the gamut. I also think that some lessons learned was that if you don't have a blueprint, you have time to find a way to create a blueprint. And it's okay to have bumps and bruises in the road, because our initial plan was only for 2 weeks, if you recall, right? And then there was a relaunch plan on April 20th of 2020, because we already knew there were some things that needed to be improved. But thanks to the staff, the entire staff, regardless of position, and to our parents who were so vigilant in terms of being truthful and saying, Dr. Fitzhugh, this is what I'm thinking, because my kid isn't working on this, or my kid they need additional support with this, or some more face-to-face time with the teacher is going to be advantageous for our daughter or son. So all those lessons learned then yielded our summer program, right? And our summer
Mhm.
program was full synchronous, which was the predicator to what we launched in August of 2020, right? And so we've done many tweaks to the program throughout the course of the pandemic phase. But I am proud to say that based on the voice of all stakeholders, we have one of the best plans in the state. By going into classrooms every day, I don't care what time of day it is, I'm going to a classroom, because that's what the Board of Education expects from me. That's what the staff expects from me. That is what the families expect from me, to make sure that we're in classrooms, to make sure that students are learning, right? That there's support given to our staff, because they deserve support, right? And that helps us look at and to see what self-care supports are going to be needed on that third Wednesday, based on our review when we're going into those particular classrooms. District-wide, we have looked at temperature checks, right?
Uh-huh.
To make sure, and I will use temperature checks, because that's something that Mr. Gaines, the principal of Oakwood, I've used that he kind of coined that
Uh-huh. That term.
terminology,
Yeah. Yep.
right? And so when he uses that term, temperature checks, every single teacher starts their day off with that temperature check. And that's something that I think moving forward, we're going to continue in the district, just checking on each other to make sure that folks are doing well and advantageous in their practice, in their craft.
Well, I'm glad that that's the case, that we would continue that, to make sure that we're all healthy and doing what we need to do. And I appreciate the idea of the Wellness Wednesdays. What prompted that though? Was that something you saw, something you picked up? I know that you do a lot of reaching out to the community. Was it something that, I mean, what brought that about?
I'll be honest with you, in the first phase of the return to schools back in March to June of 2020, I was meeting every week with the trauma informed team. And those particular conversations assisted with the creation of the Self Care Wednesdays. I had a great co author of the Return to School Plan, Dr. Tina Powell, who serves as the director of mathematics and science. And when we were collaborating about the staff surveys, about the parent surveys, and also the creation of the trauma informed team, she had stated to me I'll never forget it, Saturday morning, she called me at 6:45. And I was outside taking the garbage out. And I said in my mind, she needs to sleep a little bit. But I
Yeah,
was up,
yeah.
right?
I'm a second emotion that she needs to sleep a little bit.
Yes,
But go ahead, Doc.
a little bit. And so when she talked about the great things that we were doing with the trauma informed team, she said it'd be great if we did something like a self-care day for staff, because they'll become better if they have time just to reflect on their practice, have some time just to decompress because this is hard.
Mhm,
And then we thought about the kids, and those kids need some time just to musa,
mhm,
right? And
mhm.
so I think that all those entities, from the survey to Dr. Powell's discussion to the trauma informed team, also discussions with members of the executive team, our staff in general. I just think that that's what created the self care Wednesdays. And the one thing that I do love pedagogy. I think everybody knows I love pedagogy and practice. I love to instruct. I love to be in classrooms, but I do know that you won't have sound instruction if the mind and body are not well. And so we have to recognize that as a group of leaders.
Doc, the expectation. So students right now, well, you already know the scenario, you're constantly pushing to make sure, we follow up on students coming to school, attending, actually being on the computers, cameras on, things like that. Um, uh, Explain how are your feelings about as we move through this newness? Like, have you had to look at it and rethink, like, maybe we pull back on some things just to make sure that the students are that as long as they're engaged, like what were those some of those things that you wrestle with right now in the middle of where we are? Like, what are those academic concerns of yours that you go to bed with, like, we really got to tighten up, or I wish we could kind of get a handle on that?
So I do want to say that if I had to compare March of 2020 to December 18th, 2020, we've made inroads, extreme inroads. It looks different versus being in a asynchronous approach most of the week to now being synchronous 4 days a week.
Mhm.
Um, Popping in the classroom, seeing the level of engagement. Um, and again, in the beginning of the year where we had the issue with the cameras, I'll be transparent, right? I was not happy with the fact that students wanted to have cameras as so, right?
Right, right,
Versus like
r
so,
right.
right? And so we have been pushing that nuance to our parents, to our students. I know that, and I use Ms. Halstead, the principal of Orange Preparatory Academy, through her convocations, she has stated to her students that's unacceptable. And so we're always practicing the craft, right? So as leaders, I don't keep my screen off unless I'm running to the restroom,
Mhm.
or if I have a text that comes, I need to read it very
Right, right.
quickly. But
Mhm,
again, we have to practice it as leaders. And I say leaders meaning all adults, right? And
mhm.
so we need our families to be part of the trajectory in terms of sitting down with their children and saying the district is stating this. So I've already said it in November and December's board meetings. I'm going to say it again at curriculum committee on Tuesday, the 22nd of
Mhm.
December, and again in January 12th at the board meeting. I'm saying it because I feel it is necessary, because we need students so that we can see if they understand the concepts, right? And if they're really truly engaged in the practice. So if there's one thing that we could have done better,
Mhm.
we should have begun with that discussion with the cameras from the beginning. And again, and not giving options about how the camera should be, right? At different levels. It should all have always been on the student's face
Mhm.
in real time. Again, we just want to make sure the students are learning on a continuum, and we don't know if they're learning if we don't see them,
Right, right.
right? And so that's one major takeaway um, that I have. Another takeaway that I have, um, I didn't think that you know we would still be in a remote space in December of 2020.
Mhm.
So if you look at our return to school plan, we were hopeful that our phase 3 was going to begin on November 30th. Well, our phase 3 is not going to begin until January 19th.
Mhm.
But again, I understand because of health and safety and having those conversations with the health director in the city of Orange, who's been very cognizant in terms of giving us real time numbers,
Mhm.
not unwavering in terms of giving great advice. So we had the opportunity to really have a sit down with him and his team, and having that conversation. Say, you know what, is it safe enough, or should we just extend phase 2 because our numbers are going up? And so, one thing that I've learned through the pandemic is that partnerships are critical. Now, I know we've done a lot of great partnerships through Apple, electronics
Mhm.
last year and turn them this year, and having students of science come in and really work on that science initiative that we have, which now has yielded into having benchmark assessments in the area of science. Um, but I felt that having the relationships with um, the city and with the county, it's really important that you have real time information as it relates to the health and safety of our students and staff. We do not want to jeopardize that, right? And so I always say, if you're going to go to the food market, take nothing to chance, mask up. So we've learned a lot of that through the pandemic phases because folks have gotten sick, just going to the grocery store or just running to get gas. And so we have to be
Yeah.
cognizant of that as we're doing the return to school, which is why we've done a lot of revisions to the dates, because we had to make sure that the dates were going to be in lock and step with the health and safety of all that we service and who service those that we need to make sure that we are going to make pedagogues in the future.
Doc, if you had to look at any content, the direction of any content in township or in the schools, what would be the one that you was like, I need to jump in. Like we really we need to put something behind that. Like if I know you dig deep in the content,
Mhm,
heavily with the walkthroughs and things like that, and to push that
mhm.
to straight out to your administrators. If there was something that you were like, listen, we really need to dig deep into this area right here, what would that be?
So if we talked about content, I think every content is equally as
Okay.
important, right? But
Right.
I but in terms of areas of engagement, um, again, question discussion, because we talk about Bloom's taxonomy
Hmm.
from the bottom tiers of remembering to the middle tier of analyzing to the top tier of creating. We really want to live in that analyzing through
Hmm.
creating world, but give some love to the remembering
Hmm.
stages, right? But we want to live in remembering,
Right. I think I'm
right?
laughing at you, Doc, because I think one of my first conversations with you was like a Bloom's conversation. So I get it. I get
That's
it.
right. All I want to do is live in that good space, right?
That's it.
I want to live in analyzing to creating, but I understand the remembering because we have to take stock in assessing where the students are and
Mhm.
understanding the prerequisite understanding of what they know and what they don't know, so that we can have those small group instructional practices for our students, but in that virtual space through those office hours from 1 to 3:20 in
Uh-huh.
the afternoon, right? And so if I had to select two areas, definitely question discussion
Uh-huh.
and also pure engagement. Because again, we want to make sure that students are engaged where they are, but also introducing them to standards and skills that potentially are more rigorous than what they may be ready for. But if we keep them at the status quo, I am concerned that they will never be exposed
Mhm.
to the level of acumen that we expect,
Right.
but also that an area where they would be expected to perform on the New Jersey Student Learning Assessment that's going to be taking place in the spring of 2021.
I got you. Hey, Doc, talk a little bit about, let's get into leadership a little bit. You talked about how, well, you and I have had conversations in the past about uh, people putting in the work. And I think that sometimes people feel like because they go to school, they get a certification and they put their resume in that, that justifies them walking into a certain position. Uh,
Mhm.
so talk a little bit about leadership, staying consistent, persistent with certain things, and what does educational leadership look like to you, like in this 21st century model?
So, willingness to learn, unlearn, and relearn,
Mm, okay.
right? So, I'm going to say that again: willingness to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So, reflective practice, as I think everybody knows, is important to me, and important to the administration. And the reason for that is that you cannot be afraid to say, I messed up here, but I'm willing to learn from this person who has a little more experience. We've all have fallen, myself included, right? I remember back in 2005, my first interview with vice principal. It was not a good vice principal interview. I can tell you, it was not a good interview. I didn't realize that when you interview, you have to kind of expand your questions and you have to really give examples about what you have done in the craft and where you kind of see the craft going in terms of, and I use chapter 5 of the dissertation,
Right.
future implications of practice, right? Not about policy, but about practice. And so what I have found is that through reflective practice, you have the opportunity to really hone in on that particular that skill base. And so with that particular interview, I walked out, I was like, oh, I killed it. I killed it. A few days later, Miss Rosemary Hughes, who made me a vice principal at 26, she called me at my home and she said, how'd you think the interview went? And I said, Miss Hughes, I think I did well.
Right,
She
right,
says, well, you didn't, right? And she says, I got feedback and I feel you didn't do well.
right.
She said, you need to reflect on this particular nuance in the work. And I said, well, I don't understand. She said, you give textbook answers. You need to learn how to expand your thinking and remember you're still a teacher. So you have to remember how you're going to translate that into the administrative realm and how you're going to support teachers, families, right? And
Mhm.
also paraprofessionals and security, so on and so forth. 2 weeks after that conversation with Mrs. Hughes, I had my next interview for the position that I ultimately ended up getting, which is the vice principal of grades 6 through 8,
Mhm.
special education at Dr. Wim H. Horton Elementary School in the city of Newark. That interview I felt was so much better because I took the advice from my mentor who said, you need to expand on your thinking. You don't give the textbook answer. You have to think about the population in which you're serving. That first interview was not for Dr. Horton. That was for another school in the city of Newark. So I'm glad I had that one first because that was a dry run. But the second one was definitely a better interview because I listened, right? And it's important to know that as a leader, you do not have every right answer.
Right, correct, correct.
Okay, you can stand and listen to somebody and learn a thing or two,
Let me
right?
ask you quickly, Doc, how many times did you interview when you first got into teaching? How many times did you interview?
I had 4 rounds.
Okay. All right. And so 4 rounds, and that was the one position that you got.
I actually got 3 of the 4.
Okay.
But the fourth one was where I actually ended up because I
Okay.
subbed there.
Got you.
I was subbing at school.
So
Yep.
let me ask you, so going into the administrative arena, becoming a vice principal, how many times did you interview for the position?
I interviewed for 2 particular positions, ultimately getting one of them.
Okay. And so when you became a principal, how many times did you interview? How many different shots did you get knocked down before you became a principal?
I was knocked down 3 times.
Okay. Okay.
Three
All right.
times.
Okay.
Mhm.
And he
And
at
knocked down
the
is not a bad thing.
said,
Knocked down,
oh no,
not a bad
no,
thing.
not at all. I think the rationale behind that, Doc, is that a lot of times folks feel that either they're owed something, or I've been in this sort of industry or
Mhm.
this area for such a long time, or I should already have this position and things like that. And people, I always ask that question because I want people to understand some things take time.
Mhm.
So you have to, respect, be patient
Mhm.
about the process,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I always just ask about,
Mhm.
the time that it takes, people to get in, because I'm looking at the polished Dr. Gerald Fitzhugh II right now, and folks don't get an opportunity to see, when you might have left that interview and
Mhm.
thought you had it, and then it
Mhm.
wasn't yours to have at that time.
And
So
and perhaps maybe I wasn't the right fit for that particular building. So we have to
right,
always think about, you know, why things happen. And
exactly.
always, was I hurt a little bit? Yeah. Um, but I think ultimately there's always a path to where you're supposed to go.
Mhm.
So I'm glad you asked that because where I ultimately became principal was at Chancellor Avenue Annex Elementary School in the city of Newark.
Okay.
I tell you, I love my South Ward. It was the best experience that I could ever had.
Right, right,
That
right.
that staff, they groomed me. Those kids, they made me a parent. My children were actually born when I was the principal of that school.
Mhm.
So that school has a lot of significance in my heart. And
Okay.
so when I went back to Newark as deputy superintendent of schools, and I just wanted to share with you very quickly about that,
Okay.
because I think it's important to understand about mentorship. When I spoke a little bit before about the initial interviews that I had for teacher,
Mhm.
Mr. Roger Leone was the principal of Dr. William H. Horton Elementary School. I talk about him with you guys all the time
Yes.
because he's a mentor of mine, a brother of mine. And he saw some promise in me and gave me an opportunity to teach in his building. 19 years later, I'm in Hoboken Public Schools. I'd already left North. I was in Hoboken at that time for 6 years. My school was a focus school, which was Connors Elementary. We came out of focus status in June of 2015. I'm riding high. I'm assistant superintendent of schools. I'm tenured. And Mr. Leone calls me and he says, "Are you ready to come home?" And I said, "I'm good. I'm good. I'm tenured. I'm assistant superintendent. I'm good." And he said to me, "I want you to remember what I said to you when I interviewed you for that position." And I remembered those words that he had given me. He said, "We always pay it forward." And he says that he always going to mentor me. He checked in with me if it wasn't every month, it was every other month when I went to Hoboken, because he didn't want me to leave
Right.
North Public
Right.
Schools, right? But I felt that it was time to leave and kind of spread my wings. When he called after his appointment to superintendent, says, "I want you to be my deputy superintendent." And after reflecting on it, and I called him back and said, "I'm going to do it." That showed me something about mentorship. It showed me about relationship, and it showed me the importance of how you never forget hence where you come.
Let me
And
let me
Mhm.
jump on that. Let me jump into that,
Yep.
Doc. So, what are your goals or your vision for paying it forward in Orange? Right.
Mhm.
So, Mr. Leon sort of took you by the hand and, hey,
Mhm.
I'm going to walk you through this thing.
Mhm.
Um, Give me some insight as to what does that pay it forward ideal concept look like in Orange for you?
Good. So very similar to what Mr. Leon did for me. The coaching that I'm doing with those that I directly report to, or directly report to me rather,
Hmm.
is how I'm trying to develop you all so that whatever job that you're going to go out for, that you're going to be ready and prepared for that particular position, right? And moreover, it's not limiting you to not understanding what is out there. In fact, to allow you to have a seat at the table when there are difficult decisions to be made, and to ask you
Hmm.
all what your opinions are about practice, or about, should we extend the phase, or
Hmm.
because there's folks that are at the table that aren't administrators who give me
Right.
some great advice
Right.
about what's going on at the school level,
Hmm.
right? And so you have to be vulnerable in your own skin to be able to say, "I don't have every answer, but I can go to this person because they have this answer." And so, in terms of paying it forward, I do believe that, and there's been folks who, even in the first 19 months, have asked for me to mentor them in their master degree work. And everybody knows the superintendent is very busy, but
Hmm.
I try my best to really try to work with those teachers who are trying to become, or try to not only trying to become administrators, but finish their master degrees, because somebody did that for me,
Right.
and you pay for it by trying to do it for somebody else.
Right.
And so what
Right.
better way to do it than to allow them to sit in on a meeting, or to ask them their opinion about the craft. So that's my way of, I try to be very inclusive.
Hmm.
um, I do understand that there is a hierarchy, but I also know that those that are boots on the ground, they need to feel valued and appreciated, and know they have a seat at the table. And in this Orange Public Schools, as you always hear when we do the whole all our videos,
Right.
and the principals always say, "And this is the Orange Public Schools." Well, I'm going to kind of go back and say, in this Orange Public Schools, I always believe that it's really important that folks have a seat at the table. And I have to say that this was cultivated by my predecessor, who I replaced. I can tell it wasn't just a nuance when I came into the door, right? So you
Hmm.
have to always give credit to those that come before you. So with Mr. Lee being at the helm and having the opportunity to really know these folks for the decade that he served in the seat, he gave folks the opportunity to say, they could be vulnerable in a safe space. Which when I came in, I was able to really cultivate it even more
Hmm.
and bring it full circle by allowing folks to go on and post things in there and on Twitter, and not being afraid to call me and ask me a question about practice or about a phase of the reopening school plan. So there's always those seeds that are laid before somebody comes there. You always have to remember, and I always say this, pay it forward with those folks that also helps you along your way. So special thank you to Mr. Lee for laying that foundation so that I could be successful, my team can become successful, the kids can become successful here in the Orange Township Public School District.
Let me ask you, Doc, you talked about it a little bit earlier about the professional development, and the
Mhm,
rationale behind it was to make sure that we could keep those quality teachers in
mhm.
Orange. Can you go into that just a little more? Like, if you can share like some of the details about keeping those quality folks, because we have a lot of quality folks here. And so, walk me through that a little bit, because I wonder if it's about when we do we train, are you saying we get those quality folks, we train them up through our PD? I don't even want to guess it. Walk me through that.
Yep. So it is so important that folks feel that they have a mentor and that their mentor is listening to them, right? And
Mhm.
so, ironically, this morning, my mentor, when I received my standard cert for school administrator,
Mhm.
she was on the call for the Essex County superintendents this morning.
Okay.
And so when I saw Miss Ratner this morning, I said, and she always texted me to check in, but I just felt like, wow, my mentor, who I practiced under when I was assistant superintendent, she is in the room, and I'm sure she felt great. But I also felt great because she developed me as when she served as superintendent in Berkeley Heights. So I think of the CRAM model, and two important pieces of the CRAM model are most important: the initiation stage, where folks get the opportunity to engage with their mentor. There are um, protege type of thinking at the initiation stage, right?
Mhm.
And so I feel that when you come into a school district, you feel that your mentor is all encompassing. Where I want to develop folks is that I want them to get all the way through redefinition. And redefinition is when the protege title kind of goes away,
Mm.
and that folks have a seat at the table, and that folks will end up saying, you know what, this professional development nuance is important because I did research on my particular class, and this is what the data suggests, right? And that means that they are giving their insight about their practice and their craft instead of waiting for someone else to do it, or um, kind of waiting for their mentor to give them the direction,
Mhm.
right? And so what I'm trying to develop here in Orange is a place where we begin with the protege type of phenomenon to when we're moving into a trajectory where the rubber meets the road, where the mentor and the mentee have the same seat at different seats, but the same table, right? And
Mhm.
so it is something that I've done with my mentor, Mr. Not Mr. Dr. Christopher Tinkin, where now now I'm working on an international article with him alongside Dr. Mullen. I'm also doing some work with him as it relates to the UCEA conference that I present at. This is my second year presenting at that particular conference with my mentor. So no longer is it the mentor mentee phenomenon. In fact, it is more of um, me sitting with Dr. Tinkin and having that conversation about sound practice, and then
All at the
showing
same table.
there you go.
All at the same table.
There you go.
Got you, Doc.
And if we end up being able to do that,
Mhm.
I'm telling you, you'll be able to retain more folks because folks just want to be valued, appreciated, and heard.
Right.
And I
Right.
want to make sure that that's within the paradigm of the work here in the school district.
Well, Doc, we have, so I'm gonna change the gears a little bit. We have, before, you got to run. I know, again, I appreciate you being here. I, um, I want to talk a little bit about, um, there was a time, I believe it was earlier in the year, might have been the close of last year, Doc, when, every year we have to deal with budget concerns. What schools are being funded, what districts are being underfunded. And, I remember our numbers came out for Orange, and, they were underfunded as always. And then, I remember you and Mr. James jumping in the car and running down to Trenton. Um, can you speak to what those conversations sound like when you're sitting in Trenton and you're trying to argue for $4 and $5 million, like, or when you're being undercut by that much, what do those conversations sound like at that level?
So I have to say, even talking to our legislators, you know, having a great BA is really important, who understands the nuance of numbers, and also to be able to compliment me, who where I feel that I'm very strong in curriculum and instruction, right? And so we have to look at the programmatic pieces and the what would happen if we would be underfunded or we would lose funding. We were actually going to be okay before COVID-19. We had gotten about $4 million in, I'm sorry, $5.6 million in state funding. By the time we got through the summer, we had lost $4 million. And so what you never want to do is, cut from the school programs. And so we had to look at central office and make some really tough decisions about
Mhm.
cutting positions from central office.
Doc,
And
and Doc, that $4 million cut those are state cuts.
Mhm,
That's aid
for
coming in.
state funding,
Okay, okay.
mhm, for state funding. And, thankfully, we received over $1 million in CARES funding, but and also we got an additional $683,000 from the Corona virus funding as well, relief funding rather,
Mhm.
if you will. And so it gave us an opportunity to get Chromebooks, to get personal protective equipment. But there is strategic um, listings of what you can buy with the CARES funding and
Mhm.
also the Corona relief funds. And so the things that we weren't able to do with those funds, we had to put them on the back burner until we're able to fund them appropriately.
Right.
But those were things that they probably could wait just a little bit.
Mhm.
But we were able to do our textbook adoption for grades K through 2. We're working on the new one for grades 3 through 8 for a school year 21-22. So
Mhm.
we're really looking at the building and seeing what the building needs are. So we're looking at all of that now so that we can fund appropriately. Next week, we begin to circle back and talk with the directors about programmatic areas within the departments that are needed, as well as with the principals at you guys meeting on Monday. So
Mhm.
we're going to have those discussions about those particular entities as well. So again, budget cuts hurt, but you also
Right.
have to be very strategic in how you do budget accordingly. And so I do think that we're doing all right. We do need the additional funding for the first time in a long time. I know I saw a sign of relief on the school business administrators' face when we received the $5.6 million. When we lost the money, and if you go back to some of those Board of Education meetings after we had lost the particular funding, a lot of questions were generated from the Board of Education about what are we going to do, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
Um, and so we were very strategic in terms of not touching the schools to make sure that schools were going to continue with their programs.
Mhm.
But as an example, um, you know, certain positions, central office, we weren't able to continue because we didn't want to cut from the schools.
Mhm.
So that was hurtful for some of our departments because other folks had to take on those responsibilities.
But
So
but
it,
Doc, how does the community, uh because I know you guys have the board meetings and you have
mhm,
I know you everything that's going on in Orange, you put out there.
mhm,
How did the community uh might be, because it's a level of honesty when you say, listen, we lost $5 million. What does
mhm.
the when you put that out to the community, how does the community receive that?
That's a good question. So we had community folks saying, well, what can we do? Can we do GoFundMe?
Mm,
Can we do fundraisers just to make sure that kids have what they need, staff have what they need? You have staff members who have gone to Donors Choose, who've got things for their particular students. And then we received those Corona Cares funds.
mhm,
That was like a ray of sunshine.
mhm.
This past week, we received 824 Chromebooks
All right. All
from a
right.
grant from Apple. As you remember,
Mhm.
we received for our computer science program
Yes.
for Orange Preparatory Academy,
Mhm.
for Orange High School and
And
STEM. We
STEM.
received
Yep.
I'm not Chromebooks, MacBooks. So
MacBooks.
we
Yep.
were, and these are, and so you go back to relationships. So that was a relationship that I established with Apple when I was the deputy superintendent in the city of Newark, which goes back to my relationship with Mr. Roger Leone. So do
Mhm.
you see how paying it forward ends
Right.
up helping,
Right.
right? So he always would tell me that whatever it is that we have to do to make this work, we're going to make it work. Well, relationship building is important, and that's why I think that things that are happening in our school district now is really powerful because there's a level of trust. I know that I've only been here about 19 months, but I know that there's still more trust building to happen because
Mhm.
the trust doesn't always happen overnight,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Right.
And I want people to understand that I'm okay with that. But just know after 2 years, that trust would all be there.
Doc, well, listen, you have I'll ask you one or two more questions. You have, I believe what, Doc, at the close of at June, around June, the extension to the high school is done. What does that how does that feel? Like what's your thoughts surrounding? I mean, I think the high school that'll put us back for what, 9 to 12, right?
Yeah. So we're still working on those logistics, like
Mm-hmm.
as I shared with you
Mm-hmm.
about next school year with Orange High School
Mm-hmm.
and Orange Preparatory Academy. But what I think is important is that just having a campus model is going to
Right.
be so powerful. And so in the coming days, we're going to be talking with both staff at Orange High School and Orange Preparatory Academy about the true essence of what that
Campus
campus
smart.
effect
Yeah.
looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really want folks to understand that though they are two separate buildings, you still feed from one another,
Right.
right?
Right.
And also we're gonna do an extension at STEM so that the so folks understand. Well, it'll be Orange Preparatory Academy
Mm-hmm.
and STEM, so that those kids that are leaving Orange Preparatory Academy going to STEM, that folks understand what STEM has to offer as well.
Mm-hmm.
The same way that we have conversation what Orange High School has to offer. I'm so proud that we have um, three secondary buildings in the district at this juncture.
Mm-hmm.
That and we have one secondary program, which is Twilight,
Mm-hmm.
which is really moving in the right direction as well through the care team conversations and making sure we're putting those touch points on
Mm-hmm.
those students. So we're seeing some really nuanced pieces in the practices at all of our secondary buildings, with one caveat that college careers are the forefront of that work. And I think that through the Naviance building, the VASPA nights, the Decision One days that are happening virtually, just having those communication when we sat with Dr. Repillette and him giving us time as a president of university to say, you know what, these great things are happening at Kane. Are you interested in working with higher education?
Right.
Same thing is critical, right? And so calling you to be part of that conversation and having a seat at the table is how we try to build it and pay it forward.
Well, I like I definitely appreciate being on the phone. I remember I had the opportunity to be on a call with you and Dr. Repole, and hearing him say to both of us, this was a new for all of us, in that, don't let anyone tell you any different. But you guys, speaking specifically to you though, but this was the first time, and don't let anyone tell you any different about, the performance of such a good job you're doing. And I thought that was great, even to just, hear that at a different level, so I thought I was like floored with that. I did want to also recognize you, Doc, with the idea of, I remember immediately when we went into COVID, I don't even think you missed a beat with handing out what the breakfast is and grabbing goals. I think we probably might have been one of the first groups to do that. I thought that was so important, especially, I put a lot of time into making sure, that I give back, because we're blessed, and I think that's what we're supposed to do when we realize that. But Orange was just on it at,
We were
as
on it.
far as that was concerned, when we
Mhm.
made sure folks were, and still making sure, folks don't go hungry in this town. So I definitely appreciated
That's right.
your move with that. And so, Doc, my final question is, if and so I get asked this question, and I think I'm gonna make this like my final question, when I speak to folks on your level. Um, when you're asked the question, why should I send my kid to an orange school? What's your response to that?
So again, we go back to 21st century integration, and we are about the development of the whole child. So we are willing to learn, unlearn, and relearn as a group of professionals, right? And we're not saying that we have every single answer, but we do have the answers that are going to ensure that students are going to be academically sound as they exit the school district. Be reminded that we do have, we just created our own standalone third secondary building, which is STEM, which is own CDS code, right? But we also have students in science, which are impactful as relates to the science instruction. We're now doing science benchmarks. We're now engaging with advanced placement courses. So we're doing the right things as it relates to practice, but also engaging with what? Differentiation of instruction, taking care of the whole child, making sure that the staff and the students are good. And also, we are a school district which was recognized by the New Jersey Department of Education as high performing because all of our 5 indicators on the New Jersey QSAC evaluation were 80% and above.
That's what I do. All that. You ain't even pulled from one breath. All that. Listen, Doc, I'm not going to take any more of your time. I do want to say thank you for the time.
Thank you for being here.
Definitely appreciate you, Doc. That was great. I want to say to all the listeners, Dr. Fitzhugh is that guy that's like, if it's about the kid, if it's how we gonna make the situation better for a student, how we make sure that kid eats at night, how we make sure that kid has technology in their home, how we make sure we get whatever services that we can get to that student. He is that superintendent, that mentor, that teacher, that person that will make sure that these students have what they need. And I definitely appreciate that about you, Doc. So again, Doc, thank you for being here on the Fearless Leader podcast. And, I'll be seeing you. And thanks a lot. You take care, sir.
You do the same.
All right. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you for listening to the Fearless Leader podcast, a podcast made to help you take control of your life and find your passion. If you enjoyed tonight's podcast, make sure you subscribe so you're notified whenever a new episode is posted, and rate and review this podcast and share it with your friends. We really appreciate your support here at the Fearless Leader podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you all next week.